Excuse me, sir. What are you doing out here?
Just waiting for my bus. Why?
This isn't a bus stop. What's that in your hand?
My walking stick. I'm blind.
You're looking straight at me, and that looks like a weapon.
I'm not looking at you, sir. I just hear your voice.
Huh. Well, we got a call about a man with what looked like a weapon, and you matched the description.
Officer Vincent Palmer had served with the Denver Police Department for 6 years. Those 6 years documented a pattern that department leadership repeatedly chose to overlook. 14 formal complaints had been filed against him during that time. 12 of those complaints involved encounters with black men in commercial districts where Palmer claimed to observe suspicious behavior or potential threats. In one incident, a man waiting outside a credit union was questioned extensively about planning a robbery when he was simply waiting for the branch to open. Another complaint stemmed from Palmer detaining a man sitting on outdoor restaurant steps during his lunch break, accusing him of trespassing on private property despite the establishment's open seating policy. A third involved a man checking his mobile phone near an electronics store who Palmer searched for what he called casing the location for theft. The man had been comparison shopping prices online. Each complaint followed an identical resolution path. Palmer would be assigned mandatory de-escalation training or cultural sensitivity workshops. He would attend these sessions, sign the completion documents, and return to patrol without any measurable change in his approach or his pattern of perceiving threats where none existed. His supervisors documented these incidents, filed the paperwork, and allowed him to continue working the same downtown routes where his pattern of stops continued unabated. No suspension ever exceeded 3 days. No formal discipline ever appeared on his permanent record in a way that would affect his career trajectory or his eligibility for promotion. On a cold afternoon in late February, Palmer's established pattern of seeing criminal intent in the mundane activities of black men intersected with someone who possessed no ability to see him at all. That intersection would terminate Palmer's law enforcement career, cost the city of Denver $870,000 in a settlement, and force the police department to finally confront a half-decade of ignored warning signs and dismissed complaints that had been accumulating in Palmer's personnel file. The man at the center of this incident was Robert Mitchell, a 43-year-old black man who had been completely blind for 9 years. Mitchell had lost his vision in an industrial accident at a manufacturing facility where he had worked as a quality control supervisor. A hydraulic press malfunction had caused a pressurized chemical line to rupture, spraying industrial solvent directly into his face. Despite immediate medical intervention and multiple reconstructive surgeries, the damage to his optic nerves was irreversible. He was left with no light perception, no shadow detection, no visual input of any kind. His world was one of complete and permanent darkness. The years following his accident had been devoted to rebuilding a life without sight. Mitchell spent 14 months in intensive rehabilitation learning orientation and mobility skills. He mastered the use of a white cane, learning to interpret the subtle feedback transmitted through the shaft as it made contact with different surfaces and obstacles. He memorized the bus routes throughout Denver's downtown core, learning to count stops and listen for automated announcements that would tell him when to request his exit. He trained himself to cook independently using tactile markers and organizational systems. He learned to manage his apartment, his finances, and his daily routines without any visual reference points. Mitchell had successfully transitioned into new employment as a telephone-based customer service specialist for a health insurance company. The position required patience, clear communication, problem-solving abilities, and meticulous attention to detail. None of these skills required vision. He was good at his job, maintaining performance ratings that consistently exceeded department averages. On the afternoon in question, Mitchell had taken a few hours of personal time to attend a routine appointment with his primary care physician. The medical office was located 4 blocks from a bus stop on 16th Street, a route Mitchell had traveled dozens of times over the previous 2 years. His appointment concluded at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon. Mitchell made the familiar walk from the medical building to the bus stop, his white cane sweeping the sidewalk ahead of him in the arc pattern he had been trained to use. He arrived at the designated waiting area roughly 6 minutes before his bus was scheduled to arrive. The bench at this particular stop was positioned against the exterior wall of a pharmacy, providing some shelter from the wind that channeled between downtown buildings on cold winter days. Mitchell sat down, collapsed his cane to a shorter length for easier management while seated, and waited. His phone was in his jacket pocket, playing a podcast through small wireless earbuds that allowed him to pass time while maintaining his ability to hear ambient sounds, traffic patterns, and approaching buses. This was standard procedure for Mitchell. This was his routine. He was doing exactly what hundreds of thousands of people do every single day in cities across the country. He was waiting for public transportation while using the federally protected mobility device that allowed him to travel independently. But Officer Vincent Palmer did not see a man engaged in a routine activity. Palmer saw something entirely different, filtered through 6 years of accumulated bias and a disturbing pattern of mistaking ordinary behavior for criminal activity. Palmer had been assigned to downtown patrol duties for 5 of his 6 years with Denver PD. His performance evaluations consistently described him as vigilant and proactive, someone who reported more suspicious incidents than most of his fellow officers. His supervisors interpreted this pattern as initiative and engagement. A more accurate interpretation would have recognized it as racial profiling, operating under the guise of public safety. During those 5 years, Palmer's personnel file accumulated complaint after complaint, each one sharing unmistakable similarities. One complaint described Palmer stopping a black man standing outside a branch of a national bank. Palmer had detained the man for over 20 minutes, demanding identification and questioning him about his intentions. The man had been waiting for his wife, who was inside conducting their banking. When the complaint was filed, it was resolved with a notation about officer discretion and a recommendation that Palmer complete a 4-hour online course about community engagement. Another complaint involved Palmer approaching a black man sitting on the front steps of a church during midday. Palmer had accused the man of trespassing despite the fact that church steps constitute public space, and the man was a registered member of that congregation taking his lunch break from a nearby workplace. That complaint was closed after Palmer attended a single afternoon session about cultural sensitivity. A particularly egregious incident involved Palmer stopping a black man standing near a pawn shop while looking at his mobile phone. Palmer had detained and searched the man, absolutely convinced he was using his phone to coordinate a theft with accomplices inside the store. The man was a courier checking his GPS navigation to locate his next delivery address. The complaint filed in that case was resolved when Palmer completed another training module about implicit bias. Yet despite completing that training, Palmer's pattern never changed. Within 3 months of that complaint's resolution, he had generated 2 more incidents following the exact same pattern. Palmer's field training officer had noted concerns about his threat assessment approach during his probationary period. The training officer's report specifically mentioned Palmer's tendency to escalate situations unnecessarily and to perceive danger in circumstances that did not warrant police intervention. However, that same training officer ultimately approved Palmer for solo patrol duty because Denver PD was facing significant staffing shortages and pressure from city leadership to maintain visible police presence in commercial districts. The department could not afford to dismiss a candidate who had passed the basic competency examinations, even if his judgment and discretion remained questionable. So Palmer continued working his downtown route. His biases went unchallenged. His pattern remained unbroken. His supervisors continued filing his complaints into personnel folders that were reviewed during annual evaluations, but never resulted in meaningful corrective action or discipline that might actually alter his behavior. On that February afternoon, dispatch received a call from someone who identified themselves only as a concerned citizen. The caller reported seeing a suspicious male near the intersection of 16th Street and California, possibly homeless or mentally unstable, sitting alone with what appeared to be a club or metal pipe. The caller described the subject as a black male, probably in his 40s, wearing dark clothing and a gray winter hat, sitting by himself and appearing to watch people entering and exiting the pharmacy. Palmer responded to the call within 4 minutes. This was precisely the type of situation he considered his specialty. Proactive policing meant identifying and addressing potential threats before they developed into actual crimes. Palmer never questioned whether the caller's perception might be inaccurate. He never considered alternative explanations for what the caller had observed. He simply responded with absolute certainty that suspicious activity required police investigation and intervention. Palmer pulled his marked patrol vehicle to the curb approximately 30 feet from the bus stop and spent several seconds observing the scene. He saw a black man sitting on the bench against the pharmacy wall, wearing a gray knit cap, dark jacket, and jeans. The man was holding what appeared to be a white rod or pole, approximately 3 to 4 feet in length, resting between his knees, with one hand gripping it loosely near the top. Palmer's mind processed this image through the same distorted lens that had generated 14 previous complaints. He saw what he always saw when encountering black men in public spaces: someone who appeared out of place, someone who might be concealing criminal intent, someone who required confrontation and control. Palmer did not notice the reflective red and white bands wrapped around the object at regular intervals. He did not observe that the object was distinctively white in color, the universal symbol for blindness recognized in every developed nation. He did not take note of the man's relaxed posture, his lack of furtive movements, or any of the other indicators that might have suggested this was simply someone waiting for public transit. Palmer exited his vehicle and approached with his right hand positioned near his service weapon, a tactical stance he had been trained to adopt when approaching potentially dangerous subjects. Robert Mitchell heard the footsteps approaching from his left side. Heavy footfalls, the distinctive sound of duty boots on concrete, moving with purpose rather than the casual pace of passing pedestrians. Mitchell turned his head slightly in that direction, an involuntary human response to acknowledge someone entering one's personal space, even when vision is absent. Palmer observed this head movement and interpreted it as direct eye contact. As the subject tracking his approach visually, Palmer stopped approximately 6 feet from the bench and addressed Mitchell in a tone that communicated authority mixed with suspicion. He asked Mitchell what he was doing in that location. Mitchell recognized the voice as belonging to a police officer. He had encountered law enforcement on a few previous occasions, usually traffic officers or transit police who were curious about his white cane or wanted to verify he was traveling safely. Those interactions had always been brief and professional. Mitchell responded calmly that he was simply waiting for his bus, which was scheduled to arrive in a few minutes. Palmer challenged this explanation, stating that the location was not designated as a bus stop. Mitchell's expression showed confusion because he knew with absolute certainty that he was in the correct location. He had traveled this route for 2 years. The bus stop sign was mounted on the pole directly behind the bench where he sat. Mitchell explained politely that this was indeed a bus stop, that the Route 15 stopped at this exact location every 30 minutes, and that he had been using this stop regularly for years. Palmer then demanded to know what Mitchell was holding in his hand, stating that it appeared to be some kind of weapon. Mitchell lifted the cane slightly and explained that it was his white mobility cane, that he was blind, and that the cane was a medical device he used to navigate safely. Palmer stared at Mitchell's face, observing that Mitchell's head remained angled in his direction. Mitchell wore dark wraparound sunglasses that reflected Palmer's image. To Palmer, who had never received adequate training about blindness or disability accommodations, this appeared to be sustained eye contact. Palmer stated that Mitchell was looking directly at him and that the object in his hand could easily be used as a weapon. Mitchell responded with a mixture of patience and growing concern, explaining that he was not looking at Palmer because he could not see anything at all. He clarified that he was facing toward Palmer's voice because that was how blind individuals oriented themselves to sound. Mitchell explained that his sunglasses were not a fashion choice but served to protect his damaged eyes from light sensitivity and to signal to others that he had a visual impairment. Mitchell went on to describe his white cane in detail, explaining that it was a collapsible mobility aid with reflective safety markings designed specifically to help people with vision loss navigate their environment and to alert others to their disability. He stated clearly that this device was protected under federal law. Palmer's expression hardened. His experience had taught him that people frequently lied about disabilities to gain sympathy or to avoid scrutiny. He believed that many individuals exaggerated their limitations or fabricated conditions entirely. Observing Mitchell's head movements and his ability to orient toward sound, Palmer convinced himself that this was another performance, another attempt to manipulate the situation. Palmer informed Mitchell that he needed to see identification and that Mitchell needed to place the object he was holding on the ground immediately. Mitchell's pulse quickened. He had heard stories from other members of the blind community about problematic encounters with law enforcement. He had heard accounts of mobility canes being confiscated or damaged, of blind individuals being left stranded without their primary navigational tool, forced to rely on strangers for assistance, or unable to move safely at all. Mitchell had never imagined he would personally experience such a situation. He responded that he was willing to provide identification, but that he could not and would not place his cane on the ground. Mitchell explained carefully that his white cane was a medical device protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. He stated that he required the cane to maintain his spatial orientation, to detect obstacles in his path, and to navigate any environment safely. Mitchell compared Palmer's request to demanding that someone using a wheelchair abandon their mobility device, emphasizing that such a demand was not merely unreasonable, but was explicitly illegal under federal disability rights legislation. Palmer's hand moved to his radio. His voice took on a sharper edge as he told Mitchell that he was not going to repeat his command. He ordered Mitchell to put down the object immediately. Mitchell responded with equal firmness that he could not legally comply with that demand. He reiterated that he was blind, that the cane was his lifeline to independent movement, and that he had proper documentation of his disability, including his state identification and medical records. Mitchell stated clearly that while he would cooperate with providing identification and answering reasonable questions, he would absolutely not surrender his ability to navigate safely. This moment represented the critical juncture where lack of training and understanding transformed into genuine danger. Officer Vincent Palmer had never completed comprehensive training on disability rights and accommodations. During his police academy training 6 years earlier, he had sat through a brief presentation that covered physical disabilities in general terms, focusing primarily on wheelchair accessibility and service animal protocols. That presentation had devoted less than 15 minutes to visual impairments and had not covered the legal protections surrounding white canes or the proper procedures for interacting with blind individuals. Palmer had never learned that white canes are protected under multiple federal statutes, including the Americans with Disabilities Act and the White Cane Safety Act. He had never been taught that demanding someone relinquish their mobility device constitutes both a civil rights violation and potentially a criminal act. The only training Palmer truly understood and applied was his instruction on command compliance and situational control. That training emphasized that officer safety depended on subjects following commands. Without hesitation, that resistance to lawful orders indicated potential threat, and that establishing control of a situation was paramount. Through that lens, Robert Mitchell, sitting on a bench and defending his legal right to maintain possession of his mobility device, registered in Palmer's perception as non-compliance and resistance. Palmer ordered Mitchell to stand up and place his hands where they could be clearly seen. Mitchell did not immediately stand. His refusal was not rooted in defiance, but in practical necessity and safety. Standing without his cane meant Mitchell would lose all spatial reference points. He would have no way to determine where Palmer was positioned relative to his body. He would be unable to identify potential obstacles, uneven pavement, steps, poles, or any other hazards in his immediate vicinity. Mitchell attempted to explain this to Palmer. He stated that he was completely blind, that he possessed no visual perception whatsoever, and that he could neither see Palmer nor his surroundings. Mitchell explained that if he stood without his cane, he would have no way to orient himself in space. He could trip over unseen obstacles. He could walk into structures or other people. Mitchell emphasized that he was not refusing to cooperate, but was trying to communicate why Palmer's commands were creating a genuinely dangerous situation for him. Palmer activated his radio and contacted dispatch. He reported that he needed backup at his current location, describing a subject who was refusing to comply with lawful commands and was in possession of a possible weapon. Mitchell heard those words transmitted over the radio and felt a surge of fear, unlike anything he had experienced since the industrial accident that had taken his vision. The word weapon had been spoken. Palmer was characterizing Mitchell's white cane, his federally protected mobility device, as a weapon in an official police communication. Mitchell's voice rose slightly as he attempted to cut through Palmer's apparent inability to process the reality of the situation. He stated that Palmer was manufacturing a dangerous confrontation from nothing. Mitchell identified himself as a blind man waiting for public transportation to return home. He reiterated that he was holding a white mobility cane, not a weapon. He stated directly that Palmer was escalating a benign situation without justification. A second patrol vehicle arrived at the scene within 90 seconds of Palmer's backup request. The responding officer was Sandra Reyes, a 14-year veteran of the Denver Police Department who had worked several previous shifts with Palmer and had learned through experience to question his assessment of situations. What Reyes observed was markedly different from what Palmer had apparently seen. She noted a white collapsible cane with distinctive reflective bands in red and white, the universal markings that identify mobility devices for the visually impaired. She observed a man wearing dark wraparound sunglasses that completely obscured his eyes, a common accommodation for individuals with visual impairments. She saw a man sitting in a calm posture with no aggressive body language, no threatening gestures, and no indicators whatsoever of danger. What she saw was visible fear and confusion on the face of someone who clearly did not understand why he was being confronted by police. Reyes had completed enhanced disability awareness training 8 months earlier as part of her certification for community liaison duties. That training had included extensive modules on visual impairments, mobility devices, proper communication techniques with blind individuals, and the legal protections afforded to people using white canes. Reyes recognized immediately what she was witnessing. She approached Palmer and asked him to explain the situation. Palmer reported that dispatch had received a call about a suspicious person possibly armed with a club or pipe, that the subject matched the description provided by the caller, and that the subject was refusing to comply with commands to release the object he was holding. Reyes walked closer to Mitchell, positioning herself where her voice would reach him clearly. She identified herself by name and rank, speaking in a tone that was calm and professional. She asked Mitchell to tell her his name and explain what was happening. Mitchell turned his head toward the sound of Reyes's voice, his expression showing relief. Mitchell provided his full name and began explaining the situation from his perspective. He stated that he was blind, that he had been sitting at this bus stop waiting for his scheduled route to take him home after a medical appointment, and that Officer Palmer had approached him and ordered him to put down his white mobility cane. Mitchell explained that he had told Palmer repeatedly that he was blind and that the cane was a medical device he could not relinquish. He stated that Palmer had characterized his cane as a weapon and had called for backup. Mitchell emphasized that the object in question was not a weapon, but was a white cane, that he was registered with multiple blindness organizations, and that he simply wanted to go home. Reyes examined the cane closely, taking note of every identifying characteristic. She observed the white hollow aluminum construction, the black rubber grip, the reflective bands positioned at regular intervals along the shaft, and the collapsible joint mechanisms. Every single aspect of the device clearly identified it as a mobility aid rather than a weapon. Reyes turned to Palmer and spoke to him quietly, though her tone carried barely restrained anger. She stated that what Mitchell was holding was a white cane, that Mitchell was clearly blind, and that the device was a federally protected mobility aid. Palmer responded that Mitchell had been looking directly at him throughout the encounter. Reyes explained with forced patience that Mitchell was orienting toward the sound of Palmer's voice, which was exactly what blind individuals do when they cannot rely on visual input. Reyes turned back to Mitchell and addressed him directly. She apologized for the encounter and stated clearly that Mitchell was not in any trouble, that he had broken no laws, and that he had every legal right to wait at that location for his bus. Mitchell exhaled slowly, his hands still trembling slightly. He thanked Reyes for her professionalism. Reyes then turned back to Palmer, lowering her voice but allowing her anger to show clearly. She asked Palmer if he had any comprehension of what he had just done. She stated that he had stopped a blind man for holding his mobility cane, that he had characterized a federally protected disability device as a weapon, and that he had demanded Mitchell surrender the single tool that enabled him to move through the world independently. Palmer's face flushed as the implications began to register. He attempted to justify his actions by referencing the initial call from dispatch. Reyes cut him off, stating that the call had been based on a civilian's misperception and that Palmer's responsibility was to verify information before escalating a situation. A woman who had been inside the pharmacy during the initial confrontation emerged from the store and approached the officers. She stated that she had seen Mitchell at that bus stop multiple times over the past year, that everyone who worked in the area knew he was blind and was simply traveling to and from his appointments. She stated directly that what she had just witnessed was discrimination. Other witnesses had gathered as the situation unfolded. Several had their phones out, recording video of the encounter. The evidence was accumulating in real time through multiple independent sources. The footage showed Mitchell sitting peacefully at the bus stop. The audio captured him explaining his blindness clearly and repeatedly, describing his white cane in detail, and citing the relevant federal protections. The video documented Palmer's refusal to accept those explanations. Reyes activated her radio and requested a supervisor respond to the location. Sergeant Michael Chen arrived approximately 9 minutes later. Chen was a 22-year veteran of the department who had investigated every conceivable type of officer error during his career and maintained absolute zero tolerance for mistakes rooted in prejudice or ignorance. Chen spoke with Reyes at length, receiving her account of what she had observed upon arrival. He personally examined Mitchell's white cane, noting every detail of its construction and markings. He interviewed the pharmacy employee and 2 other witnesses who had observed portions of the encounter. He spoke directly with Mitchell, listening to his complete account. Then Chen turned to Palmer with an expression that conveyed both professional disappointment and administrative finality. Chen ordered Palmer to surrender his badge and service weapon immediately, informing him that he was being placed on administrative leave effective that moment. Palmer's eyes widened in shock. He began to protest, stating that he had simply responded to a dispatch call about a suspicious person with a possible weapon. Chen interrupted him, stating that Palmer had stopped a blind man for using his white cane, that Palmer had characterized a federally protected disability device as a weapon, that Palmer had demanded Mitchell relinquish his mobility aid, and that Palmer had created a clear violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act that was now documented by multiple witnesses with video evidence. Chen repeated his order. Palmer complied with trembling hands, the reality beginning to settle that his law enforcement career had just effectively ended. Chen then addressed Mitchell directly. He introduced himself, apologized formally on behalf of the Denver Police Department, and stated unequivocally that the encounter should never have happened. Chen explained that Palmer had failed to recognize disability accommodations that should be automatic for any properly trained officer. He informed Mitchell that the department would conduct a comprehensive investigation. Chen stated that Mitchell was completely free to leave whenever his bus arrived, and that if Mitchell chose to pursue formal complaints or legal action, the department would cooperate fully with those proceedings. Mitchell stood carefully, using his cane to orient himself. He addressed Chen directly, stating that while he appreciated the professional response from both Reyes and Chen, Mitchell needed the sergeant to understand the full impact of what had occurred. Mitchell explained that he had been terrified during the encounter with Palmer. He stated that being unable to see what was happening around him, hearing the call for backup, and hearing his mobility cane described as a possible weapon had created genuine fear for his safety. Mitchell identified himself as a blind black man who had been sitting peacefully at a bus stop and stated that Palmer had treated him as a criminal threat. Mitchell stated that he was fully aware of his rights under the ADA, that he understood the legal protections for mobility devices, and that he knew the encounter had been illegal. Mitchell stated clearly that he would be pursuing legal action. By that evening, the incident had become a major story across social media platforms and local television news broadcasts. Headlines described a blind man detained by Denver police for using his mobility cane. Disability rights advocates condemned the Denver Police Department. Multiple witnesses had uploaded their video recordings. The footage documented everything in excruciating detail. The videos showed Mitchell sitting peacefully, Palmer's aggressive approach, the conversation during which Mitchell patiently explained his disability, Palmer's refusal to acknowledge those explanations, the backup call, Reyes's intervention, and the gathering crowd of witnesses. National disability rights organizations responded within hours. The National Federation of the Blind issued a statement condemning Palmer's actions. The American Council of the Blind demanded Palmer's immediate termination and comprehensive reforms. Mitchell filed a comprehensive federal lawsuit within 36 hours. The lawsuit named Officer Vincent Palmer individually, the supervisors who had reviewed and dismissed his previous 14 complaints, and the Denver Police Department. The complaint alleged disability discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act, unlawful detention without reasonable suspicion, failure to provide reasonable accommodation, violation of civil rights, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Most significantly, it alleged deliberate indifference by the department based on Palmer's documented history of 14 complaints over 6 years without meaningful disciplinary consequences. Denver's city attorneys reviewed the case materials and reached an unavoidable conclusion. The city possessed no viable defense. Body camera footage had captured every moment. Multiple independent witnesses corroborated Mitchell's account. The ADA violations were textbook examples. The city reached a settlement agreement 16 months after the incident. The settlement required Denver to pay $870,000 to Robert Mitchell, representing one of the largest disability discrimination settlements in Colorado history. Officer Vincent Palmer was terminated from the Denver Police Department 11 weeks after the incident occurred. The termination letter stated that Palmer had detained a disabled individual for utilizing a federally protected mobility aid, had demonstrated fundamental ignorance of disability accommodations, had treated a white cane as a potential weapon, and had escalated a non-threatening situation without justification. Most critically, the letter referenced Palmer's documented pattern of discriminatory stops, pointing to 14 complaints as evidence of an established inability to perform his duties without bias. The termination was immediate and final. Palmer's name was entered into the National Decertification Index, effectively ending his law enforcement career permanently. Palmer attempted to appeal through the police union. After reviewing the body camera footage, the union declined to contest the termination, concluding that no credible defense existed for Palmer's actions.